everyone, it's Miss Ashley here. Just a heads up for our families listening to today's interview that between minutes 17 and around minute 20, we will be talking about a traffic collision that has some pretty graphic details. So if you have young children listening, I suggest you skip it entirely, but everything else is very content appropriate for families, especially when we talk about Jim Carrey. Just a spoiler alert. All right, enjoy today's interview with retired Murrieta Fire and Rescue Chief Pat Jennings. Hello everyone, my name is Ashley Jennings Bagay. I'm a library specialist in the services department for the Murrieta Public Library, and we are doing a new series for our new podcast, and it's called Community Matters. So to kick things off, I thought I would do one of my favorite people, and that's my dad. So this is Pat Jennings. He is a retired fire chief for the Murrieta Fire Department. He is also a historian for the city of Murrieta and part of the Murrieta Valley Historical Society. So I thought we'd kick things off with my dad. Why not, right? Okay, so one thing, the first question I really want to ask, because you spent most of my life being a firefighter, but your dad was a volunteer firefighter. Your brother was a firefighter, and you were. So can you explain the history of your family in the Murrieta Fire Department?
Well, you got to go back a little bit farther. My dad was a paid professional firefighter for 20-some years at the Marine Corps base at Camp Pendleton. So he was a volunteer in Murrieta on the Murrieta Volunteer Fire Department from 1960 to 1969. Your other grandfather, Ray Bose, was a volunteer from about 1955 to about 1960. So it runs in the family. So as far as a family tradition, I never really thought of myself ever being a firefighter. Now my brother Mike always wanted to be a firefighter and follow in my dad's footsteps. So when he got out of high school and he went in the military, he was a firefighter. Later on, he worked at Camp Pendleton also. And then he started volunteering in Murrieta, and he got hired in about 1987 when they hired for the first fire station. So I volunteered in 1987, 88, and I got hired in 1989 when the Murrieta Fire Department opened their second station out in Cal Oaks. Prior to that, I also worked a couple years on the Camp Pendleton Fire Department, so I had a background in the fire service when I started volunteering at Murrieta. So that's how we all kind of ended up at Murrieta.
It runs deep, the blood for the fire department in Murrieta. So what was it like? Because I know the fire department, when it was volunteer based, at least in Murrieta, and when your dad was a volunteer firefighter for Murrieta, what was that like growing up? Like, how was the department ran? Like, what did he do when there was a call and all that stuff that people might not realize?
Well, because it was a volunteer department, the staffing, the volunteers weren't at the fire station. For the first year of the department's history, the fire truck was actually parked at the Murrieta machine shop because they didn't have a fire station. When the department formed in 1947, in April of 1947, they parked the fire truck at the Murrieta machine shop, and they rang the bell on the Murrieta Methodist Church to alarm that there was a fire. I think they ran 3 calls that first year. So during that first year, from 1947 to 1948, they built the fire station, the old fire station on C Street that is behind the Murrieta machine shop.
Yeah, that big blue building everybody takes pictures in front of.
Yeah, it's the little building behind it.
Yeah.
So it's the one with the double doors, easy to see. So because it was a volunteer department, they had a big siren on the top of the roof. So instead of calling 911, you call the local number. It rang at the machine shop because Victor Garrison was the assistant fire chief who worked at the machine shop, and it rang at Raymond Thompson's house and shop up on Washington because he was the fire chief. Later on, it rang at Marvin Kern's shop and home. So when they got the call that they needed the fire department, they would drive down to the fire station between the double doors. They would push the button. The siren would start spinning up. You could hear it all over the valley from Elsinore to Temecula. and then the front doors would open. They would write the call down on a chalkboard inside the apparatus bay, and then when enough people showed up, they'd take the rig and go to the call. Because when I was a kid in the 60s, we'd ride our bicycles down there and look to see where the call was on the blackboard. If it was close enough in town, we'd try to ride out and see it. So if you were at home, middle of the night, whatever, the siren went off. That's how it went. Later
Everybody
on,
knew.
when I was a volunteer, they had just stopped using the siren because everybody complained of it. By then, we had pagers, so that they would go off and give you the call.
So it went from being like a town busybody with the siren going off to more of like a pager system where it was kind of like.
Yeah, the volunteers got it. You didn't really hear the whole fire siren thing going on.
Got it. So that's kind of cool. I want to talk about what the process was like from you becoming from a volunteer to a paid firefighter for the fire department. You always talked about you taking like a test, and I believe it was Marvin saying, "Hey Pat, you should take the test," right? How was that whole process?
Well, I ended up, I worked on the Camp Pendleton Fire Department for a couple of years, and then I went back to running equipment that I was doing before I went to work at Camp Pendleton. So I knew that job was going to eventually kind of close out because they were going to start contracting a lot of it out. So I started volunteering because I knew they were going to be hiring people. So I volunteered for 2 years, meaning I'm sure you remember me getting up in the middle of the night and go flying off hour after hour. So that was kind of the goal all along. Well, the test that they wanted me to take was the ISTA Essential Test. So I hadn't.
Got it.
It's just a basic firefighting skill test, 100 questions. That was one of them. And then later on, late in 1989, when they were looking to hire for the staffing for Station 2, then there was some other testing and physical agility testing and stuff like that. So I tested and got hired for Station 2 staffing.
Okay. So having your dad be a fireman and then you and Camp Pendleton being a fireman, even before all of that, like, was there any assumptions that you had growing up, or even Uncle Mike that you know of growing up had assumptions that when you got into the job were completely different? Like for the library, people go, "Oh, must be nice to read all day." And I'm like, we don't read at all. We're so busy. We just don't have a chance to sit down and read. Did you go into the job as a firefighter with any assumptions where all of a sudden you were like, this is not what we do?
Well, because I'd worked at Camp Pendleton, it was a different culture and tradition than at Murrieta.
Okay.
Because Murrieta, Camp Pendleton was a well-established fire department. When I went to work there in, 1979, they'd been they'd had fire department on Camp Pendleton since World War II.
Okay.
So I went into that culture, and because my dad worked at Camp Pendleton, and then my brother Mike was later working there, I kind of knew what the culture was. And it was a little earlier kind of culture. Well, when I went to work at Murrieta as a volunteer, then of course I was around those guys, so I adapted to the culture. And then later on, when we started hiring people full time, as we were transitioning from a volunteer, what at that time was what they call a combination department, was paid and volunteer. So prior to about 1986, 87, everything was volunteer. Then they started staffing, and then progressed on, and eventually phased the volunteer department out. So the culture at Murrieta kind of built as we went. So the misconception that's, like you talk about the library, is that firemen sit around all day and play checkers. Well, even at Camp Pendleton, we didn't do a lot of that because there's all kinds of stuff to do. There's equipment maintenance, there's station maintenance, there's inspections, and the never-ending training. So you never really ever stop training and learning the whole time you're in the fire service. So that's the most common misconception, is that there's a lot of downtime and that all you do is sit around and play checkers. Nowadays you watch TV.
Yeah. I know. I always remember like the fire station, at least Station 1, always had like this huge gym. And the fire guys must have been so mad at me, because I remember like you guys were all making dinner and I'd like kind of run amok. This was like pre-city days. So listen, I was a kid. But I remember like going in and changing the weights. I'm sure the fire guys were like, "Gosh darn it." So yeah. I messed up all the weights. I'm really sorry. So, I mean, they keep up with with their training all the time.
Yeah, and the physical agility, the standard is you have a daily routine that includes all that, and there's time for physical training, PT in the morning that's accounted for.
Right, and you guys have regular testing too. I always remember hearing you saying that, like, the new hires had to go through these training steps over like an expansion of so much time, and
Well,
that
yeah,
was
they you have to test to get in, then you go through a probation period, which I don't know what it is now, it was 18 months.
wow.
So you go through all that training and evaluations, and then later on, of course, you got to maintain all your, whether you're an EMT or paramedic, you have to do all the continuing education, and then you have to do all the testing and all the certification for that. Just as many different things. And
Yeah,
then there's all the promotional testing and specialty testing. Just depends on what you're doing. Always something.
always something, right?
Yeah.
So looking back out of all your years, which we'll get into that in a minute, did you have like a very like a fun part of the job or like a hard part of the, like, was there something that you always looked forward to, like a big like rager fire? What was like the hard part of the job, like all the good and the bad and the ugly?
Well, some of the best times I had with Murrieta was when I was a volunteer, because we ran all over Southwest Riverside County. Because
Okay.
back before then, like when I would respond from home, if you remember that,
Mm-hmm.
there was only Station 12 in Temecula, 61 in Wildomar, and 68 in the whole part of the county, and 7 up at Sun City. So that was it for the county. They were running very light too. So we would run on the squad. We had the only auto extrication equipment in this part of the county. So yeah, we ran on all the calls. I mean, the big calls, they were the fun ones. Later, as I promoted up through the ranks, the downside was personnel issue problems, the administrative side of it.
Yeah.
I always would like to go on the calls, but to go with the job, you had the administrative responsibilities.
I
So that
mean,
was kind of a drag something.
yeah, you talk about the 18 months while you were there and always having to train. Some of those guys didn't make the 18 months, right? I remember
No,
you coming
no, that
home
was
really
a down.
upset. Yeah,
You would
so
have to let
that's,
somebody go off probation, so it's always a tough thing.
it's like breaking a dream. I mean,
Yeah,
really. Yeah.
but we
Um,
worked hard there.
yeah, exactly. Um, so kind of talking about other aspects to the job. So you were part of the dozer operators for strike teams and swiftwater rescues. So can you kind of explain the dozer? I get the name wrong. I know there's a specific name to the dozers, but you ran dozers on strike teams and you were also part of swiftwater rescue. I always remember you going on long trainings to like Long Beach or Los Angeles. Can you explain those and about like other essential services firefighters kind of partake in instead of the traditional fires, emergency calls, cats in the trees type things?
Well, what you're talking about is kind of some extra things.
Mm-hmm.
So the most common strike team leader in the fire service is engines. So based on the California Master Mutual Aid System, if somebody has a fire, well, they request resources. So this Murrieta would send an engine or a type 1 structural engine or a type 3. So 5 of like units makes a strike team. So you have to have a supervisor, usually it's a battalion chief or sometimes a division chief, that basically takes control and manages that 5 engine. And if you have 5 engines, you could have up to 25 people on it. So you're responsible for that. So there's a whole series of levels of training that go along with that. So you're a strike team engine. Because I had a history in heavy equipment in between before I went to work at Camp Pendleton and after I left the Camp Pendleton Fire Department, I ran heavy equipment. So I got qualified to go with dozers. So a lot of agencies like Cal Fire and everybody, they send their own people go with their dozer. As dozer strike team is 2 dozers, but they need somebody to manage the contract dozers. So that's kind of what I did.
Okay.
So instead of being an operator much, you manage and take care of what the needs and all that. But there's a whole spectrum of specialties. You can be a firefighter, then you can be a paramedic, but there's all these other specialties. There's trench rescue, there's confined space, there's swift water, vertical channel, there's hazmat, and the list goes on, and they're all their
Right.
own. They might You might go to 3 or 4 days worth of class for one, or you might go for a week for another. Go instructor classes. There's heavy rescues. There's high angle. If you're part of one of the urban search and rescue task forces, Riverside is a combined group. It's a bunch of people come together. So you have to do all that training. So each over and above your job as a firefighter or whatever, then you go to all these additional trainings for additional certification. So that goes back to why you never ever really quit training.
Right. And, the fire department sent two people during 9/11, one at the Pentagon and then one at Ground Zero.
Yeah.
And then John, who went to Ground Zero, also went to Hurricane Katrina.
Yes.
And
The guys from Murrieta went to Katrina.
and who were so there was more than just one. There was like two or three, you said just now?
Barry Robertson, Fong Dang, a couple other guys, plus John. John at that time, he was a dog specialist, so he
Right.
got a dog. Everybody else was just the rescue specialist guys.
Yeah.
So one of our guys,
went.
Evan, was on when the space shuttle blew up and scattered all over southeastern United States. He was on that. More fires than you can count with overhead, strike team leaders and logistic guys and all kinds of stuff. So Murrieta really gets out there. But back to training, all those take a lot of training to be able to fulfill those jobs.
Absolutely. And we're able to send them because we have that specialty training, right?
Yeah, and then like last year when the Tanaha fire burned, then those resources came back to us. So
Exactly.
That's all part of the California Master Mutual Aid.
And that on a quick segue with that, because I mean, Tanaha, the fire was not far from where we live, so we were able to watch it, and you hear it over the news and everything, and it took a few days to knock out, but it just shows just how professional and well trained the Murrieta Fire Department is, and the rest of Cal Fire, because it was knocked out. I mean, it wasn't knocked out in a few hours, but I mean, it was knocked out pretty quickly. I don't know. I don't know how to word it, but I always look at our fires when something happens around town and how quickly and professionally our department kind of knocks it out. And it shows how well they're trained and how well they know their community. So yeah.
All those are plus. Murrieta's always been an aggressive firefighting tradition. So
yeah, we're very lucky. So I know when I grew up always sitting down with all of the fire guys and some of the police officers and love hearing the stories that come out. Do you have any like chilling stories, like family friendly chilling stories that you would like to tell people? Anything crazy?
Well, in a 30-year career, I was paid for 28 of those years in volunteer. I mean, you see crazy things. But one particular one that, I can replay most all those really bizarre incidents. So back when I worked at Camp Pendleton, I was at Station 6, which ran on the I-5 freeway. So we get a call out on the freeway for a traffic collision involving a motorcycle. So we go out onto the freeway out there. There's cars everywhere, the usual mayhem, stuff scattered everywhere. Well, the people tell us this guy's trapped under this car. So we run over there, and all we can see is his feet sticking out from under the car. So back then we didn't have any, there was no real power tools, like the Hearst tools, and everything was all mechanical. So we threw a floor jack we carried a floor jack on the engine just for this kind of stuff. So we jacked the car up and we slide the guy out from under the car. And when we pull him out, he's got no head. I mean, so we look at each other, we give each other that, oh my God, look, right?
Oh my gosh.
We're peering around trying to find what the heck's going on. We think his head's under the car. Well, when we're looking, the left rear tire of the car, we look in the fender well, and there's his head inside the helmet, like looking out at us. So just stuff like that.
I mean, at least we know that was a quick way. I mean, that he didn't suffer. But that kind of leads me into my next question about being like a supervisor. So in the supervisor for fire department, it's like the fire chiefs, the division chiefs, the battalion chiefs, and even really the captains too. You have to, it's just not search and rescue. It's not knocking down a structure fire. It really has that mental capacity too. You know, and I've listened, and I grew up listening to the scanner at home, and I've seen you on some, I've listened to you on some pretty hefty calls. One that sticks out is where the public house downtown is, the 2-story building, when it caught on fire.
Yeah.
During its, when it was still like
framed and wrapped, ready to go.
yeah, I mean, it was during the recession, so it kind of halted construction, so there was no businesses in there, and it caught on fire, and I was listening to the scanner because it was just always on, and I remember your tone changed on the scanner, and my mom, being who she is, she's like, uh-oh, because your tone went really calm, really slow. You pronounced every single word. You were asking your crew to copy you, like, do you copy? Because the fire had shifted, and you were all of a sudden more concerned about the guys in the structure fire versus taking care of the fire that themselves. So as a battalion, I think you were a battalion chief at that time.
Yeah.
What skills do you need to protect the crew, both physically because of the fires and mentally, because of what you potentially can see on something like a traffic collision, like you just mentioned? What other skills do you need?
Well, it all goes back to training. There's all kinds of coursework, there's college classes, workshops, all kinds of stuff on building your career development. In the fire service, the average engine company, you have the firefighter paramedic, he's the nozzleman there's the engineer, he's the guy that drives the rig, and he's the one responsible for it. And so your captain's the guy or the girl that's in charge of the whole rig. And they're also in charge of the station they're assigned to and everything there. So your fire captains are your first supervisorial level, technically.
Okay.
So then there's a battalion chief, which in my case, you can either be on admin or you can be on suppression. So you're responsible for the day-to-day operation of all the fire stations. So conversely, when you have a fire or any kind of incident, when you get more than 2 rigs together, then you have to establish the incident commander. They're responsible for the overall plan, progression, everything that goes on with that incident. So like for the public house fire, I was actually the first one on scene to that.
Okay. Oh, I did not know that.
I called it in. It came in over the radio. I heard it. I rolled up, saw what was going on, started making assignments, and then dynamically, then my job then is to set the tone, make the duty assignments based on what you want to accomplish, where you want to stop the fire, all that, with a back for safety, because that was an exterior fire and ended up being what they call a defensive fire, where everybody was outside just pouring water on it. Inside fire attack, where you have a couple bedrooms going in the back of the house and you make an interior attack's a whole different story. So you got to keep track of those people. You got to sense your accountability. You got to have your rescue group for your 2 in, 2 out, all that stuff. So all that stuff you're thinking about, you have to set it up. You have to assign the resources. If there's something specifically that you want to do, and that's where a change in tone or clear directions come, you want them to do something very specific that you're giving them directions for. Otherwise, you could tell them, I want you to go to the roof and ventilate it. That means I don't care how you do it. Right. Or I need you to do this, 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 and this is specific because you have other things contingent on it. And all that time going on, you got to keep track of your people. You have to figure out 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 moves ahead of where you're at if conditions change. Yeah. Or conditions change. Personally, on most of the single family dwellings fires I was on, I always watched the roof because tile roofs collapse very quickly. So you don't want your people in there when they collapse. And so then in Murrieta in particular, we had to do callbacks, we had to provide station coverage. So you're a busy guy. Okay. A lot of it you can learn by training, but a lot of it you learn on the job.
A lot of it you do learn on the job, because if you have people on the roof, I know that was always a concern. You have people on the roof, they're making like the holes to vent, like to bring the smoke out, right? One wrong move, and then they're all of a sudden inside the house. So right. it takes a Exactly. So you kind of have to have strong communication skills and the wherewithal to remain calm. You know, when I'm in emergency, I start hyperventilating and I talk 1,000 miles an hour, and you can't do that on there. So definitely takes a lot of
Well, but you have
in-person
to
training.
purposely slow down and talk clear and concise because, and then you want a copy because you want them to acknowledge that they understand what you're trying to do. And then the good thing about that is for that next couple seconds, you can forget about those. So you move on to the next one. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's part skill, part training.
Yeah. Um, so we've already talked about how hard it is, but for you, what was the hard, oh, you said personnel, but what was like the hardest part of being a fire chief when you were actually out there on the fire, whether it's a strike team, a structure fire? Was it thinking 10 steps ahead? Was it counting? We say guys because we don't have any female firefighters, which we are hoping to change, but um, you know, what part of it as of being a fire chief out there on a fire, what's the hardest part for you?
Well, again, you go back to you're dealing with people.
Okay.
So no matter how they're trained, no matter how consistent, every once in a while you run into an issue where somebody didn't quite understand something, you weren't concise enough, or they don't, you know. And my way of thinking was if I want them to do something a specific way, I would tell them. But I don't want an argument. I'll explain later why I did that. That's what I told my shift. If
Mm-hmm.
I tell you I want something done a specific way, don't question me, do it that way, and then later on I'll tell you why we did it that way. But if I don't give any specific directions, then you're on your own. You have the training. I wouldn't assign you something you couldn't do. Nothing out of the ordinary. If we're going to do something out of the ordinary, then we're going to get together and talk about it first because it goes back to safety. But people, not that it's good, bad, or otherwise, if you're going to run into problems on an incident, you're probably going to have problems with people, and 80% or 90% of those problems goes right down to radio communications. Somebody didn't hear something, somebody misunderstood. Comm is always your weakest link, whether we're operating here in the city or somewhere else. You're not getting through somewhere, or something gets misconstrued, or they don't
Yeah.
understand it.
I mean, it's knowing your crew. It's like you have to understand, well, this person responds better this way, this person responds better. Like, I don't yell at me, like, don't reprimand me in front of people, reprimand me behind doors, right? That you kind of have to know which one of your firemen, your firefighters responds. You have to know personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the fire ground, there's ways to cure that. Now, if you're out of, I went on strike team as a strike team leader where I had 5 engines from 5 different agencies, none of them from Murrieta. So I don't know
So
any of these people.
So you don't know their personalities,
Right.
you don't know their relationships, you don't know their procedures from their cities.
Yeah. But in California, the training's pretty standardized. So
Okay.
it's, usually not too much of a problem. Sometimes you have problems. Like I said, if you're having a problem with people, 80% of the problem you have with the people, 90% or more is comm. It's radios or whatever. But sometimes you have people problems too. That's just the nature of people. Doesn't mean they're bad or untrained or whatever. It's just the way it is.
Just the way it is. But if you want to become a firefighter and you want
Well,
to become a fire chief, there's ways of other things besides, your basic training that you
well,
can
I always
learn.
figure like everything approaches everything. So
Yeah.
you can always solve your problems.
So we've already talked about how I grew up as a fireman's daughter. Um, but I grew up knowing your traditional stop, drop, and roll exit points. When we had our last fireman story time a few years ago, which was super huge, so we had to scale back. We talk about getting the children comfortable with how the firefighters look in their full gear because it looks kind of scary.
Yeah.
They're not they don't look like a normal person because they have their masks on, their oxygen tanks. But what would you tell families out there how to protect themselves, in a fire, kind of what to help teach their children, like escape plans, like what's the number one thing that you have for families?
Well, you need to talk to them. Escape plans are the one, safety around the house, meeting point either out back or out front, but common sense stuff, you know. You remember ever burning a candle in the house when you were a kid?
Nope, nope, not allowed candles.
You know, just stuff like that. Make
Yeah.
sure your smoke detectors are working. And really, it's hard when you have kids, but at night you should keep most of the doors in the house closed because a closed door will buy you a lot of time. But smoke detectors in every room, exits. You know, if you gotta get out of the house, you gotta crawl. You know, get below the smoke. Yeah, 911 for the kids. All that.
911 is huge. So my daughter is terrified of practicing 911. She thinks she's going to get in trouble by calling 911. So just to reassure parents, it's okay. If they accidentally dial it while training, just stay on the phone, explain to the dispatcher that you're practicing.
Well, the easier thing to do, especially here in Murrieta, is call dispatch on the non-emergency number.
That's right. I'll see if I can't post the numbers here.
Yeah, so you call them and say, look, I'm training my daughter. I'm gonna have you got to give them your address because you're calling. Well, you'll be calling from a cell phone, but they're calling from a house phone, like a hardwired house phone. Then on the dispatch end of it, that address comes up when you dial it in. Cell phone, it comes in, I think, just as a number or a generic location. I don't know about their new CAD system, how that works.
Right.
But the idea is you let them know you're going to be calling. And so they could go through the whole, they're kind of prepared for it because they will recognize your number coming in if you tell it to them. And then they can do the whole 911, what's your emergency? So they can talk through it. So kind of takes the scare out of it.
Yeah. And then I know some cell phones check with like on the settings, but for our phones, because it's locked with password, you can actually add another phone number on there. So I added your phone number on my emergencies, so she can have a chance if it's not an emergency, if the house isn't on fire or I'm still able to breathe. You can train them to call somebody else, but 911's huge.
Yeah, and you know your phone doesn't have to be unlocked for that.
Yeah, exactly. So coming back to the department itself, so our fire department, the Murrieta Fire Department, was basically, I always say that the Murrieta Fire Department was the community for a very long time. And especially when you consider like the Fireman's Barbecue, which has been going on for almost 70 years, especially during pre-incorporation. So pre-1991, I mean, it's huge during the cityhood incorporation. Our first mayor and one of our city council members were firefighters. But what were some of the other events that the fire department hosted?
Well, it was mainly the barbecue. You guys, if you want, I can cover the history of the barbecue. So the department formed in April 1947.
Mm-hmm.
So to celebrate that and finishing the construction of the new fire station on C Street in 1948, they held the first barbecue. So the guy that taught him to barbecue was an old cowboy guy around here named Gib Miller. So Gib taught him how to pit barbecue in the ground, and we used a pit barbecue with a few changes all the way up until I think it was 2013.
It was 13 was the last year because I was pregnant. So yeah.
So initially, because the Murrieta Fire Department formed as a fire protection district, formed before there was any city. So prior to the fire department, the only real governing body of any importance in Murrieta was the Farm Bureau. Mm-hmm. So the people in the Farm Bureau, after one more house burnt down in Murrieta, they kind of tasked Raymond Thompson, who was a professional firefighter at Camp Penland, by the way, to put together a fire department. So during the early years, most of the money from the barbecue, because it was such a hit the first year, they decided to keep going to celebrate the department's anniversary and as a fundraiser, because right. the fire district gets 0.0001% of the assessed property value tax in the district. So the district now encompasses what's now the city of Murrieta, the city limits. But as they started making a little extra money into the 50s, they started helping like the Boy Scouts and the 4-H clubs, and they started kicking some of that money back into the community. So the Murrieta Town Hall Association formed in 1956, where they took over the Hunt House where the museum is now, and they took over that piece of property. Well, then at that time, about half the proceeds from the barbecue were now being plowed into the Town Hall Association. So that in turn went to all, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, all those civic groups, plus maintenance of the park grounds, the Gymkhana arena that was there where the ball fields are and all that stuff. Plus the barbecue gave all those groups a chance to earn money. So you'd have a barbecue. The department didn't provide drinks, or they didn't have a cake booth, or they didn't have this or that, or they didn't sell memberships, have a fundraiser, a raffle, an auction, whatever. So that provided a venue for those. And that went all the way up into, well, they were still doing it into the early 80s, but then that kind of fell off as the department started transitioning. The town hall was playing bingo, so they were making a lot of money. The barbecue still provided a venue for everybody, like a garden club, and everybody to make money. And then it was about that time that the women, the wives of the firemen, got together and formed the fire department auxiliary bucket brigade. So they in turn started supporting all the department operations, donating equipment, backboards, Stokes baskets. Remember the Care Bears on the backboard?
I always wanted one, never got one. Because
I think we still have one, by the way.
Oh, well, it's mine now.
Monitors later on, we were in the EMS business, and then of course the toy and food drive. So that was the basis for the barbecue basis. Now I don't know what their philosophy is now, but back when I was doing it, it was a break even for the department money wise, because we didn't really need the funding, but it was to continue the tradition and give everybody else a chance to come in and make some money.
Right. Yeah. First year the barbecue didn't happen. Thank you, pandemic. But it's something that I think for me, after growing up here, I still think it's like the number one attended event for like when it comes to history, because I mean, it was centered around community, and that's what I like about the fire department.
And when I was growing up, everybody, if you ever left town, you always came back for the barbecue. Even that's true today. I mean, last year when we opened the museum, all the folks came to that. That's part of why we did what we did, because everybody now, we're 4 generations or 5 generations with some families that come to the barbecue. Yeah,
my childhood best friend was planning on coming in from Arizona, and then the stay-at-home orders came, and she was like, "Well, rats." So, because it's it's something that's on your calendar. I'm going. So. Yeah,
traditionally the barbecue is set on the Sunday that's the closest to the 16th of April. That's not Easter.
Right. So maybe controversial topic. I don't think it's a controversial topic, but every time I used to say this, people would go, "You're lying." But is it true we could have had Fire Marshal Bill Jim Carrey in town?
Yes. Oh,
please explain.
Here's the history for that one. So, as you know, in the late 1980s, 86, 87, 80, 89, Jim Carrey was a character on Wayans Brothers TV show called In Living Color. So one of the characters he played was Fire Marshal Bill. He played a fire marshal.
A very bad fire marshal.
Pretty bad fire marshal. His 2 favorite lines were, "Let me show you something," usually when he blew his hand off or blew up something, or "Don't worry, I'm a fire marshal." So during, 88, 87, 88, 89, 88, 89, 90, somewhere around in there, the department was earning money for the Alicia Ann Roosh Burn Foundation. So we would earn money to donate to the Burn Foundation. Dr. George Fishbeck, the Channel 5 weather guy, would fly out here in a helicopter and pick up a check. The big people that were helping us with that was, of course, the fire department auxiliary. So one of the things we set up was a spaghetti dinner. We would raffle a wave runner, all that stuff. Well, we actually contacted Jim Carrey's group to see if he would come out and host a dinner we could sell tickets for. And he said, yeah, the only thing at that time Jim Carrey needed was somebody had to pay for the airfare and pick him up at the airport and take him back to the airport. So
Because
when
he wasn't Jim Carrey. He wasn't like Liar Liar, Ace Ventura,
no, he was going to
Jim
come.
Carrey yet. No.
Jim Carrey was going to come and play Fire Marshal Bill for our fundraiser. Because we spun it, we were going to give the money to the Alicia Ann Rouge Burn Foundation.
Right.
But some of the chief officers got word of it, and they didn't think he was a very good example, so they kiboshed it. So we had to cancel it. And that's the true story.
Wasn't. But that would have been amazing.
Would have been amazing. He was ready to come.
Set the record straight. We could have had Jim Carrey in town.
I had to feed him and get him back and forth to the airport.
Oh my gosh, I was still really young at the time, so I but I would have been rolling all over that.
Probably about as Jesse's age.
Yeah. Okay, so anything else you want to add? We're down to our last question about being a fireman in Murrieta. Anything kind of relating towards that?
No, it was a great career for me over the 28 years. I went from a volunteer firefighter to a deputy fire chief / acting fire chief at the end of my career. It's a great career. It's a lot of work. I would tell people that are interested in it, first and foremost, start setting yourself up in high school. The one thing you don't want to get is some kind of police record or anything really heavy, because it's an instant disqualifier. Plan on 2 years of college, paramedic school, your internship in that's probably going to take you a year. And then your fire academy, and keep your physical conditions up. And most of all, stay out of trouble with the law. And my advice to people are, if you're going to do it early in your life. Not that you can't do it when you're in your later 20s or you have a family, because it's just a lot more work. And be prepared to test and test and test. I tell, during the course of my career, when we started the paramedic program in 2000, we started hiring people from the outside, and saw the caliber of people that come in as, they've been paramedics for years, they've been firefighters, other places and stuff. I always said, I'm really glad I didn't have to compete with you guys, because it would have been tough. And it's even worse now. Some of these guys that are on the department now, by the time they did the 4-6 years to get to the position where they're able to be competitive to hire, sometimes it's another 3 to 5 years before they get the job in. So it's a tough grind. So in between that, you have to make a living. And usually you're working for AMR or an ambulance company, or you're doing paid calls somewhere where you're not making a lot of money, but that's the grind.
That is. And Murrieta has really set up at least Murrieta students to succeed. We have the Fireman Explorer program.
Yeah.
A lot of people I knew in high school went through that. My cousin went through that, all that amazing stuff. One of my classmates went through that, and I think now he's a battalion chief now, I think.
There's several people on the Murrieta Fire and Rescue after the accreditation in 2017 that started in the Fire Explorer program.
Yeah.
Dave,
and then now they're
one of the battalion chiefs, Trent Moore, a couple other guys that started that way. So after I retired in 2015, Chief Ferguson, Chief Lancer started. They're working on starting a program at Murrieta Valley High School.
Yes.
An academy style program for people that are interested in the fire service.
Yeah, and I really admire that about Murrieta Fire and Rescue in the city of Murrieta, is because they're setting up our high school students, our community, to become a successful firefighter.
Yes.
So I really
start early.
Yeah, and we can start even earlier because we have library books. How to throw the library in there. So you can always check out, we have them all, fire department, fire engines, all that good stuff, so they can check out and read. And
so you need to get the EMT handbook, the current training handbook, and the paramedic book, and there's the Firefighter 1 curriculum that basically, if you go to a fire academy, when you're done, you get your state Firefighter 1 certificate. Some people get it on the job. That's how I got mine. But most departments nowadays prefer an academy.
Okay, yeah. Where's like the local academy? I know there's one in LA.
Clark Training Center over in Riverside, and I think Crafton Hills has one.
Okay, even closer than I thought.
Maybe San Marcos has one now.
Okay.
They're easy to find over in Yucaipa. That's where Crafton Hills is. But yeah, those kind of curriculums. I mean, the State Firefighter 1 certificate stuff. Any of the state fire marshal office training programs, you find those online. But the EMT handbook and all that. I mean, they offer the EMT class over at Menifee, Mount San Jacinto. You have to go to Crafton Hills, or maybe they got one going out of Clark now. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So it's out there. It's just you got to be able to do the grind to get it.
Yeah, and it's worth it though.
Yeah, once you get in and get set, it's a great career.
Yeah. You're probably, well, I'm a little biased, but you're still my favorite firefighter. All right. Thank you so much. And
Good. For you.
Yep. And then I will try and put the dispatch numbers down below so our families can have it in their phones. But thank you very much. I appreciate it. And on a side note, I love you.
I love you too.